Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 276 and this card is just crazy stacked from top to bottom with amazing fights. But in the main event, we have a middleweight title fight. Israel Adesanya defending his middleweight title against Jared Cannonier, and this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction. I've already done a bunch of UFC 276 prediction videos. I will link those all down in the description if you want to check them out after this. And also, guys, I have a channel membership. The link is in the description. We will be messaging live on Discord during UFC 276. There's a bunch of other benefits too, loyalty badges, custom emojis, but if you guys want to support the channel, the link is down in the description. But I am very excited for this fight. When it was initially announced, this wasn't one of those fights that I was like, oh my God, I am so hyped for it. But now that we're a little bit closer, I am very excited for this fight. Israel Adesanya is a very tough puzzle to solve in MMA. And I'm curious, can Jared Cannonier be the guy to do it? And for Jared Cannonier, he is 38 years old. It is now or never if he wants to be a middleweight champion. And, you know, he does have that nasty power. So I'm very curious how he approaches this fight. And I'm very curious how Jared Cannonier comes in. What's his game plan to try to dethrone Israel Adesanya and take the middleweight belt from him? So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, Israel Adesanya is 32. Cannonier is 38. Adesanya is 6'4". Cannonier is 5'11". Adesanya has an 80-inch reach. Cannonier has a 77.5-inch reach. So a big height advantage and a slight reach advantage for Israel Adesanya. If you look at Jared Cannonier, he has 20 pro MMA fights. He has 15 wins, 5 losses. In his 15 wins, he has 10 wins by KO or TKO, 2 by submission, and 3 by decision. So Jared Cannonier primarily wins by KO or TKO. Jared Cannonier started his UFC career all the way back in 2015, and he entered the UFC as a heavyweight. He has a loss to Sean Jordan, eventually moves down to light heavyweight, has some mixed success at light heavyweight, lost to Glover Teixeira, lost to Jan Blachowicz, lost to Dominic Reyes, all elite level light heavyweights. No shame in that. Then he finally moves down to middleweight, and he is undefeated at middleweight outside of a fight against Robert Whittaker, former champion. He has wins over former WSOF middleweight champion David Branch, which was a solid win at the time. A lot of people probably don't know David Branch, especially nowadays. After that, he has a win over Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva was far out of his prime at this point, and it was a checked leg kick, so take that for what you will. Then he beat up Jack Hermanson, finished him in the second round, landed a nasty uppercut, and then finished him off with brutal ground and pound. After that's when he had the fight with Robert Whittaker back at UFC 254, October of 2020. And in this fight, he just got outstruck. He got outjabbed by Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker was countering him every time Cannonier tried to put a little bit of pressure on him. And just Robert Whittaker was the better fighter in this fight. Hurt Cannonier badly in the third round. I think he landed, that combination where he leans over and throws that head kick. Hurt Cannonier badly. Followed him to the ground. I thought he was going to finish him in this fight, but Cannonier was able to survive. And once he got back to his feet, he went right back to fighting Robert Whittaker at an elite level, even though there was only about a minute left. After that loss to Robert Whittaker, he beat Kelvin Gastelum. That was August of last year. This was a back-and-forth fight. It was a very competitive, close fight. Could have went either way. But the biggest moment of this fight was Jared Cannonier rocking Kelvin Gastelum midway through the fight. I don't remember exactly what round it was, but this was a very competitive fight. Jared Cannonier lands some good shots in this fight, and Kelvin Gastelum is a vastly underrated at middleweight because he's lost so many fights, but they've been close fights against elite level middleweights. After that, and his most recent win was at UFC 271 in February this year, the same card that Adesanya fought Whittaker for the second time, and he fought Derek Brunson. And going into this fight, my prediction video was spot on. I thought that Jared Cannonier would win this fight. I thought Derek Brunson would have some early success with the takedowns, but as the fight went on, I thought those takedowns would become more labored and sloppier, and the stand-up looks awful, and I thought eventually in the second round, Jared Cannonier would finish him, and that's pretty much what happened in this fight. Jared Cannonier had a terrible first round. He got taken down by Brunson multiple times. He got dropped by Brunson on the feet, which is never good, and at the end of the round, Derek Brunson had his back looking for a rear naked choke. But in that second round, Cannonier came out. He just regrouped. He landed some nasty shots on Derek Brunson, hurt him badly, followed him to the ground, and landed some of the most brutal ground and pound elbows I've ever seen. The ref jumped in, but the corner of Brunson threw the towel in. That's how brutal that ground and pound was from Jared Cannonier, and that's one of his best weapons in MMA. Moving over to Adesanya, he has 23 pro MMA fights, 22 wins, 1 loss. Of his 22 wins, he has 15 by knockout and 7 by decision. His most recent fight was against Robert Whittaker in February. This was a very close fight, but I thought Adesanya took it. And the story of this fight was the jabs and the leg kicks of Israel Adesanya, and that's what he did all fight. Robert Whittaker had some moments. Some people thought Robert Whittaker won. I thought Adesanya won this fight just with the leg kicks and jabs alone. The fight before that was against Marvin Vettori. Not a super eventful fight at UFC 263. This was June of last year, but he just outstruck Marvin Vettori for the majority of the fight. I know Marvin Vettori, somehow he's delusional and thought he won that fight, but he clearly lost that fight. Got outstruck by Adesanya. Marvin Vettori was able to get a couple takedowns. Adesanya popped right back up. Similar thing in the Robert Whittaker fight, and similar thing throughout Adesanya's career outside of Jan Blachowicz. When he gets taken down, he gets right back up. Fight before that was against Jan Blachowicz at light heavyweight, trying to become a double champion. And, you know, regardless of what the commentary said, this fight was not very close. Jan Blachowicz outstruck him in this fight and outgrappled him. The power of Jan Blachowicz had Adesanya super tentative. And then not only did Jan Blachowicz outland him on the feet, he took him down and controlled him in the later rounds and won this fight. Before that, Israel Adesanya dismantled Paulo Costa. The footwork he showed in this fight, the elite level feints, the elite level striking that he showed in this fight. Paulo Costa just could not find him in this fight, and Adesanya just brutally chopped his legs, and then in the second round clipped him. I think it was a left hook counter. Dropped Paulo Costa and finished him off with brutal ground and pound from a borderline mount position. It was a little bit of a weird position. Before that, terrible fight against Joel Romero. Both those guys should be ashamed of themselves in that fight. Neither one did much in that fight. Fight before that was when he won the undisputed middleweight title against Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker came in here with a game plan to pressure Israel Adesanya. I think he saw what happened in the Kelvin Gastelum fight, and he said, I am going to pressure Adesanya nonstop. And it just showed the elite level head movement and elite level striking of Adesanya to just get out of the way of the shots of Robert Whittaker. Lands a nasty counter punch, hurts Robert Whittaker badly, follows him to the ground, and finishes him off with ground and pound. The fight before that was when he won the interim middleweight title against Kelvin Gastelum. And this was an amazing back and forth fight. Probably the best middleweight fight of all time. So if you have not seen Israel Adesanya, Kelvin Gastelum, go watch that fight immediately. Great fight, back and forth. Adesanya showed his heart and his cardio in that fight. It was up to the 5th round. Whoever won the 5th round in this fight was going to win the title. And Adesanya just went out there and almost finished Kelvin Gastelum in that 5th round. And you look over Israel Adesanya's UFC career, and this guy has fought nothing but good competition. You know, sometimes I come on here and I pick apart guys' resumes, but look at the resume of Israel Adesanya. He made his UFC debut against Marvin Vettori. Then he beat Brad Tavares, who is still relevant in the middleweight division to this day. Then he dismantled Derek Brunson, has a win over Anderson Silva, out of his prime, but still outstriking Anderson Silva is decent. Then all the other fights I went over: Kelvin Gastelum, Robert Whittaker twice, Yoel Romero, even though that was a terrible fight that no one really won, Paulo Costa. The only loss he has in MMA is to Jan Blachowicz, who was the light heavyweight champion at the time. So Adesanya, just elite level competition for his entire UFC career. And when I look at this fight and I start looking at the skill sets of both guys, Adesanya is clearly the better striker. He's just super technical, is very good at keeping the range, has the height and reach advantage, has a beautiful jab that he uses over and over and over again. And Adesanya is one of the best leg kickers in the game. I think both of these guys have shown they have 5-round cardio. Cannonier clearly has the power advantage. I don't think either guy is going to try to wrestle in this fight. I think Cannonier might try to mix it in. But if Robert Whittaker and Marvin Vettori aren't having much success against Israel Adesanya in the grappling and wrestling, I highly doubt that Jared Cannonier is going to have that success, especially considering Jared Cannonier has been taken down by Gastelum, taken down by Whittaker, taken down, I think, even by Jack Hermanson. I'm not 100% sure on that one. but just been out grappled in some of his fights. Derek Brunson taken down by Derek Brunson. I just don't think, a strategy of Jared Cannonier coming in and trying to out grapple Israel Adesanya in this fight, that's not going to work. This is going to be a striking battle. And we know what Adesanya likes to do. He likes to play the game at range, pump the jab, land the leg kicks, wait for you to make a mistake, counter you, and try to finish you. Or he's just content just picking you apart from the outside and winning a decision. We've seen he's not afraid to have a relatively boring fight, like the Marvin Vettori or Robert Whittaker fight, or even the Yoel Romero fight. That's actually the boring fight. I didn't find Vettori or Whittaker that boring. They were still decent fights. They weren't amazing fights. But Adesanya is more than willing just to hang out at range and pick Jared Cannonier apart. And I really feel like in this fight, Jared Cannonier's only advantage is his power. And I really think he needs to track Adesanya down. He needs to pressure him and land a big shot, hurt him, and put him away with ground and pound. I don't see another path to victory for Jared Cannonier. He's not going to win the decision. He's not going to out-grapple Israel Adesanya. It's just not happening. So he has to finish him. Jared Cannonier has nasty body kicks, nasty leg kicks. He has power in both his hands. Borderline nuclear power. I would say he probably has the best power in the middleweight division, and he has amazing ground and pound. But it's all whether or not he can track Israel Adesanya down. Adesanya has great footwork. We saw it in the Paulo Costa fight. Paulo Costa is a pressure fighter, and he was constantly moving forward, trying to land on Israel Adesanya. People were like, why didn't Paulo Costa go after him more? It's because Adesanya was feigning, pumping the jab, and kicking his legs out from underneath of him, and he just could never track him down because he was constantly circling around the cage and just counterpunching him. And it's going to be very hard for Jared Cannonier in this fight to track Israel Adesanya down. It's going to be very, very hard for him. I just don't see how he does it, and that's why I'm going with Israel Adesanya via second round TKO, and more specifically a late second round TKO. I just think that Adesanya has great head movement. I think he has great feints. I think he has a beautiful jab, great leg kicks. And I think Cannonier, Adesanya for years have been saying, I want to fight Jared Cannonier. He's the dark horse in the division. Adesanya is very smart. He has a very high fight IQ. And he knows that Jared Cannonier is a stylistic, perfect matchup for him. Jared Cannonier isn't the best striker. Jared Cannonier isn't going to try to mix in the grappling. Jared Cannonier is just going to try to land kind of looping punches, power punches, and Adesanya can counter him. Adesanya's got great head movement, and that's why he's been wanting this fight for so long, I believe, because I believe Adesanya believes that he can get a flashy KO over Jared Cannonier. Because what this fight's going to look like, Jared Cannonier isn't like a crazy pressure fighter. He mixes in the pressure. He'll kind of wait, look to counter, and then he'll have burst of pressure, kind of like Yoel Romero, but not as explosive. All of a sudden, he'll start moving forward. But he doesn't throw a lot of combinations. He only throws like 2 or 3 punches, when he lets his hands go. And I think Jared Cannonier is going to be trying to chop the legs of Israel Adesanya, but I also think Adesanya is going to be chopping the legs of Jared Cannonier. And Adesanya is very good at getting out of the way of leg kicks. And meanwhile, Cannonier is super heavy on that lead leg, always loading up, looking for big shots. And I believe as the fight goes on, it's going to be kind of like Paulo Costa, where he's just going to be chewing him up, death of 1,000 cuts. He's going to be ripping him to the legs, ripping him to the body, and Adesanya does it so well. He'll chew up your legs 10 times in a row, then all of a sudden he'll switch kick you right to the head. And it's going to be very hard for Cannonier to know what's coming. And one thing that Israel Adesanya doesn't get enough credit for is his reaction time. I mean, this guy has great head movement, and he's always dialed in. You can just see when he's fighting. It's like he sees every strike coming a mile away. The Paulo Costa fight, the Robert Whittaker fight. The only guy that's ever really successfully landed on Adesanya is Kelvin Gastelum and Jan Blachowicz. Mainly Kelvin Gastelum, that was just a crazy fight. But Jan Blachowicz outstruck him as well. But I think that was a combination of just the size, the fear of the wrestling, and the power of Jan Blachowicz that Adesanya was super tentative, and I expected Jan Blachowicz to win that fight. And I just don't know if he's going to be worried about Cannonier that way. I think Adesanya is going to be circling around the cage. I think he's going to be kicking the legs of Jared Cannonier. I think this is going to be a jab fest. I think he's going to be jabbing Cannonier's face off. And I think as the fight goes on, we get through the first round. It's going to be a dominant first round, but a 10-9 first round for Israel Adesanya. I think as the second round goes on and the same thing is just keep happening over and over and over again, I think Cannonier is going to get a little bit more frustrated and a little bit more aggressive. And I think that's when he's going to make a mistake. In the Derek Brunson fight, and Derek Brunson is not a very good striker, Jared Cannonier threw a combination, he overextended, and Derek Brunson made him pay and hurt him badly, dropped him to the ground. And that could have been the end for him, but obviously he survived. Israel Adesanya will do the same thing. And Adesanya has amazing killer instinct. If he hurts you, he goes in for the kill. We've seen it against Robert Whittaker. We've seen it against Paulo Costa. If he hurts you badly, he will go in for the kill. But I think this is going to be one of those fights where Jared Cannonier is kind of hanging out. It's a little bit of a boring fight. Adesanya's peppering the legs, pumping the jab, and eventually as it goes on, Cannonier's just going to get frustrated and he's going to move forward looking for big shots, overextend, and Adesanya is going to hurt him badly and then finish him off on the ground. I'll be curious how this fight looks because Jared Cannonier is very durable. He got hurt in the Whittaker fight. He got hurt in multiple fights before, and he's been able to survive. He's not a guy that just has a suspicious chin or anything like that. So I'm genuinely curious to see how he's able to deal with the counter striking of Adesanya. And I'm curious if this is going to be one of those fights. Maybe it lasts to the third or fourth round because Cannonier kind of waits on Adesanya. Because I don't know what the blueprint to beat Adesanya is. I think, pressure makes sense. Because, that's how you're going to land against a guy like Adesanya is just back him up and get him against the fence and then land a big shot. But when you're pressuring a guy like Adesanya and he has such good head movement, such good feints, it's so hard to track him down, especially circling out. He pretends like he's about to go one way, then he goes the opposite way. And the next thing you know, he's back in the center of the cage. It is so hard to track him down. And another thing that Adesanya does so well is he moves well at his hips. He will lean his entire body. Look at the Robert Whittaker, the first fight where he knocked Whittaker out. He dodged a punch. He didn't even move his feet. He just leaned his body back at his waist and landed that counter shot. And I just think he's going to be so dialed in. He's going to see every punch coming from Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier is much slower than Israel Adesanya. And I think he's going to be able to pretty much dodge every shot that Jared Cannonier throws. And I think as Jared Cannonier gets a little bit more aggressive, that's when Adesanya is going to make him pay. I think this is going to be a classic Israel Adesanya performance where he actually gets a finish. What he did to Paulo Costa, what he did to Robert Whittaker. I think that's what this fight's going to look like. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.